Hello and welcome to episode 117 of the Alfa Romeo Driver Podcast, brought to you by the Alfa Romeo Owners Club. I'm Guy Swarbrick and we're having a little bit of a rest over the Christmas and New Year period, so instead of recording a new episode, we've dipped into the archives to bring you a collection of excerpts from our Meet the Board series, recorded during the pandemic in 2020. Specifically, we've pulled out the sections where our club's management team talked about how they became involved in the marque and the Alfas they've owned. We kick off with Club Manager Nick Wright, who we interviewed way back in May 2020. We featured your 159 in Alfa Romeo Driver about a year ago now, I think. But I think you've recently bought a new car. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I have, yes, a newly acquired car. It's a 916 Spider, Phase 3. I had the thought a few years ago, looking at them turn up at events and things, and I sort of wanted one, and I put it off. I thought, well, I'll never have time to drive it because I'm always away at weekends and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't. And then something happened last December and I thought, just go and get one, make the time, you'll agree it. So I had a will on the club manager. I, of course, have my own manager, and she agreed to buy it as well. So we started looking earlier in the year and spotted one early March. Yeah, it was what I wanted, low mileage, only a couple of owners. So it's a 2005 model. It had been on Sawn for the best part of a year, so had it collected rather than drive it back from Surrey back to mine. So that came in on a Sunday. It arrived back here. I taxed it, drove it to Mario, who looks after my 159, on the Wednesday. He checked it all over. It's all fine. We went out for a little drive at the weekend, and then the lockdown came, and it was back on Sawn again for a month and a bit. So yeah, that was it really. I spent all that time cleaning it, and I even resorted to emailing John Griffiths for some detailing tips on it, which is when I realised it was time to stop.
Have you had a chance to drive it since the lockdown started to ease off a little bit?
Yes, we have. So obviously, it's been nice weather since then as well. So we went out last weekend, and a couple of evenings during the week we've been out as well. So all we can do is go for a walk when we get there. Obviously, there's nowhere to go for a drink or anything. So
that's quite a desirable car collection between the 159 Q4 and the Spider. But the vehicle you're probably most associated with is the big white van. What's happened to that over the last couple of months?
Yeah, it's just been gathering dust on the drive, unfortunately. I haven't cleaned it, and it's quite a big beast. I clean it by hand before all the events. So it's quite a big beast to clean, so I haven't missed that. But it's it's still sitting there. There's going to be a little problem to solve when we do need to use it again, because it's full of all the events equipment. And I don't take all the events equipment to all the events, because obviously it won't all fit in the van with the shop stuff and everything. So I'm going to have to put that in the garage, and that's where the Spider is now residing. So something's going to have to give there. So we'll find out. It's quite like, apart from the events, the van's quite iconic. So outside the house, actually, all the trade people seem to mention it when they come round here. And I had a guy come round, fix something, and he was stood in my kitchen, and he said, I had a Spider. He said, I absolutely loved it. My favourite car. He stood in my kitchen. So he looked at the floor, shook his head. He said, it was the saddest day of my life. He said, when my son came along, I had to drive the Spider to the garage, and I drove home in a Vauxhall Severa.
Doesn't get much worse than that, does it?
It doesn't, no. But so there we are. That's so it's all ready to go. Once the lockdown's gone, we'll be off again.
Since then, Amito's joined the Wright household, and the Spider's been replaced by the Alfa that never was, a 124 Spider. And he has a new van too. Next up, we have Richard Murtha, the club's Motorsport Director, from an episode first broadcast in August of the same year. I think it'd be useful just to have a reminisce about your life in Alfas. So where did it start? What was the first car you owned?
The first Alfa I owned came courtesy of a guy I'd befriended when I worked in Coventry for a while in the late 60s, early 70s. It was a 1300 GT Junior that he'd bought to replace a Saab that he'd had. And unfortunately, one of the Coventry Corporation buses decided to drive into the back of it, which didn't do it any good at all. He bought it back from the insurance and then decided he didn't fancy repairing it. So, because I'd always fancied the car, I bought it off him and did a very basic repair of just sort of jacking out the back wheel arches so it was roughly the right shape, hitting it with hammers so it didn't spring back, and put a bit of filler on it. Because the beauty of the 105s, of course, is that anything backwards of where the rear suspension mounts is only useful for carrying the petrol tank. It doesn't do anything else. So,
if it's still there.
Well, bear in mind this was probably about 76 and it was a 71 car, so it wasn't that bad.
My experience of written off Alfas is it tends to be the good ones. I had a completely rust-free Alfasud Sprint that got turned inside out by a Toyota pickup truck.
Oh, don't make me cry. That was a good little car, though, that 1300 GT Junior. I mean, it helped me learn how to handle a car because its road holding was negligible, but its handling was superb. So, it got very good at opposite locking and things. It was a good little car.
So how long did you have that?
It must have been about 5 or 6 years, but not as the main everyday car. A couple of years after I got it, I went to work down in London. And although I did take it down there, even in those days, you don't drive in London. Tube into work and maybe use it in the evening to go across London if I was visiting somebody. And eventually, a friend of mine back up in Lancashire decided that he'd written off, or had written off, because somebody nicked it, 1600 GT that he'd got. No, 1750 GT, sorry, he'd got. He bought mine and stuffed the 1750 engine in it. By that time, I had an Alfasud, so...
Tell me about the Alfasud, because that had a unique feature in terms of your buying history, I think.
Indeed, yes. The only new car I've ever owned. Bought in August, I think it was, 1979, T-Reg. It was a triumph of man maths, of course. I was using as my commuting car from Lancashire to London and back an ex-police Ford Consul GT, 3-litre GT. At the time, and that time in 79 petrol prices were rocketing and it wasn't the most economical device. Man maths convinced me that I could justify buying a new SUD on the savings it would make in fuel costs.
And it would pay for itself.
Absolutely. I'm not sure it did, but I was happy with the deal, and I sold the Consul on to somebody who wanted something to tow a caravan, and it was a good tow car.
You had the SUD for a while, I think.
About 7 years I had it. It went from the my pride and joy. It got washed every week and all this sort of thing, to doing a few rallies in it. And I used it as a chase car when one of my friends was doing the 85 RAC. I did chase car in it for that, which was hard work, but it was a great car. By the time I got rid of it, of course, it was rotten as a pear. By that time, it was only running a 1200cc engine because I'd had a cam belt go on it. So I took the 1500 out and stuck a 1200 in just to keep me mobile. But I then started working some distance away, and again, economy was needed. So I'm afraid it was replaced by a Volkswagen Jetta diesel.
Delightful.
Slow.
So you had the SUD,
yeah.
And then I think the next one you went convertible.
Yeah, did a deal with a mate of mine, of one of the guys we met through when we were rallying larders, of all things. A bunch of scouts nutcases. This guy was a Liverpool Docks copper, built like the proverbial brick outhouse, but a great lad. He had the contacts on the docks for bringing cars in, so he'd got in the habit of going over to the States to buy vehicles and bringing them back. And one of the ones he brought back at one time was a Spider. So I fancied this, of course, and ended up doing him a deal whereby I got the Spider and a Citroen Visa as a runabout, and he got my Golf GTI, which I'd used and abused, of course. I had that Spider for quite some time. I actually ended up swapping it to somebody for a Ginetta G15, which unfortunately got burnt out in a fire at my scrapyard. But so that's a whole new story. Sometime later, I took a redundancy package from BT where I was working, and he was off over to the States doing a car buying trip again and suggested I go with him. But bearing in mind, this was the time when the pound was about $2 to the pound. So it was a good time to go to the States. I went over with him and another mate of his, a guy who'd been his co-driver. And we had a manic 5 days or so where all we seemed to do was drive around looking at cars. And on one of the trips, I found lurking in this warehouse in New York State a rather nice-looking Spider. Well, unfortunately, my mate wanted that one, so he bought that. And I bought an Imp. But then we found in the classifieds up in top end of New York State another one, a doctor, I think, who only used it as his summer car. So we went up, looked at it. Yeah, good deal. I remember just what it was now, $2,750, I think it was. So I bought that. My mate had a deal set up with a shipping company who'd ship it down to the docks to get it back, and he knew the agents, etc. So we did that. And then somehow I bought another one, which was a real wreck. It was a spares car, but that was a few $100, very cheap. So I bought that as well. So I ended up bringing 3 cars back, which went down very well when I told my lady when I got back.
So we're about 16 years into your Alfa owning story now. You've had 5 cars plus a rally car at this point.
Uh-huh.
And then the numbers start to snowball.
Well, I mean, I've still got the Spider that I bought in the States that I brought back in. That was 92 when I brought that back. I've still got that, though it hasn't been on the road for an awful long time. It broke down on me one day and got shoved in the garage, but it's only actually been out once since then, because there's always been another project around. I actually went for quite a long time without an Alfa as a road car, apart from the Spider, you know, as an everyday car. But then so about a year after buying it, I bought a scrapyard, which seemed a logical thing to do at the time, because what we were doing was looking at buying a sub-post office. But, you know, someday I just looked in the Auto Trader and there was this scrapyard advertised. I mentioned it. Everybody I mentioned it to said, bloody sight more your line of work than doing a flipping sub-post office. So I thought, oh. So I went off, looked at it, ended up doing a deal and bought it. So, of course, that let me into the world of salvage auctions and things, and then came across a 1.7 engine 33 sport wagon, which I couldn't really see what was wrong with it. Well, I still don't really know. When I bought it at the salvage auction, main thing was the steering was awful. So I changed the top mounts on the front struts, but it was fine. So that was my lady's car for quite a while, until she came home one day and said, "What's a fast Alfa?" I tempted to say all of them, but, well, why? I said, well, I was doing about 90 coming over the top, and this Alfa went past me. How dare he? Didn't have a sort of V60 motif to it, did it? Oh, it did. So we went through a picture quiz, and I basically got it down to being a 164. So I made the stupid mistake of saying, I suppose you want one. Yes. Right. So I then sourced, again through salvage auctions, one that had relatively mild front and rear end bump, been tail-ended and pushed into something, I think. Green one, which was unusual, dark green, with a velour interior. Again, I got the same body man that I had in Accrington, did the repairs for me. I bought a rear end from a salvage auction, and we got the front bits that we needed. And that was a good car. Ran it for quite a while, and the gearbox packed up, and I couldn't get hold of a gearbox anywhere, so I ended up buying another car, which was the more traditional red over grey, but was definitely the upmarket one because it had alloy wheels, whereas the other one had steels. It also had leather interior, but unfortunately, the reason it was at salvage was that it had been nicked. The nice thieves had cut the square Alfa badges out of each of the leather seats. They were still as comfortable. It actually turned out to drive a lot better than the original one, so I ended up running that one. And yeah, we've always had an Alfa around since then. And then 155, 2-litre 155, I think, which I bought off one of my customers. He'd been eyeing me for ages to find him a door, because he'd done the classic error of backing out of his garage with the door open and caught the door. But at the time, there weren't any 155s around in breakers. I couldn't find any anyway. So in the end, I got fed up with him asking me to buy a car so he could have bits. I ended up buying the car off him, and then went out and found the bits to fix it.
We skip forward into January 2021 for our next conversation, this time with Club Finance Director John Timms.
Back in 1979, I joined a company up in Bicester that was a small offshoot of a big American company you may have heard of, United Technologies. They make all sorts of interesting things. And we made test equipment for engines, like a sun tester. People are familiar with that type of thing, but it wasn't. It was typically installed in factories. But the side effect of that, of course, is there's lots and lots of car nuts working for the company, and me being one of them, but also lots of others. And one guy had just bought Alfa 1.5 Ti. I think in January 1980 he bought it. So it was one of the first Series 2 1.5 Ti's. And he was raving over it, of course, because he was right. And I was looking for something to replace. Both Beth and I had got Minis at the time. And I actually had a 1275 GT with stage 2 preparation and all sorts. It was a bonkers car. It used to leave the road if you went over a bump in the middle of of a bend, no suspension. So anyway, we're looking at various British cars to replace it, a bit bigger, recently married, well, getting married we were at the time. And he said, just try my Sud, you'll love it. We tried the Sud. Beth came up to Bicester, tried it, and just fell in love with it. And I just went out and we bought the first Sud that was for sale on Auto Trader that was a year old that we could find. And it was a red 1.3 Super, 1286 engine, 4-door. And it was fabulous, absolutely fabulous. We took that all over Europe and so on, just fell in love with it. So that was my first Alfa. Got worried about the tails of rust, and I probably sold it too early. And 82, I bought a Sprint Veloci, brand new, wonderful car. It's probably the most reliable car I've ever owned. Nothing went wrong on it. Never went out of tune. Absolutely. We just loved it and just go anywhere in it. I'd love another one, a good one. I think you probably heard recently on a Thames Valley section Zoom meeting, we had this conversation, and that was one of my dream Alfas, a real one that doesn't rust. So that was my introduction to it. I just find them. Still think the Suds are one of the greatest cars ever made. Best handling, as you know. You owned them as well.
I did. I had a couple of Sprints. My one Sud Saloon was slightly rusty in that you could probably have put your fist through the top of the front wings, but the Sprints were both pretty good, actually.
And the opposite for me. My saloon was fabulous. Never really had a big rust problem. There was a little bit around the rear wheel arches, if I remember rightly, and I should have kept it because it was really, really good. But the Sprint, I think every panel had rust. Roof, A-pillars, the lot. It was just a complete basket case in 3 years. It was unbelievable.
I'm probably slightly romanticising my second Sprint, as Ian Brookfield would probably confirm, because he spent quite a lot of time putting new seals and various other bits on it to keep it rust-free.
Yeah. It's such a shame. And they're just such a good car. Anybody who's driven one will know. Anybody who hasn't, that happens to be listening to us, you have to try and find a way of driving one day.
Yeah.
They are just so good. Yeah, I saw on my my Android the other day, there was, I don't know whether you get a news feed appears on the left, and it's obviously things that they know you're interested in. And the Telegraph apparently had an article about the Alfa Sud for the weekend, and it was NUM something or other P. I can't remember the number now. It's quite a well-known car in the club that they actually featured in the article. So there may be one or two people actually looking at the moment.
Yeah, that was one of the conversations we had with Ian when Ian was on the podcast. It seems to be about that time where the people who either had one or dreamed of having one when they were new are now at the point where they've got the disposable income and the time to start thinking about having another one. So they seem to be, the kind of the coming 105, although the numbers sadly aren't there.
Tiny numbers, though. Yeah. There's just nothing like. I think they were saying there were 27 of them left. I don't know whether that was TIs. I would imagine it's just TIs.
Yeah.
That's a Series 1 TI, which is like the purest model.
Yeah.
Although the later ones, once they had electronic ignition and things like that, were much more reliable, I would have thought. Anyway, that's what got me into Alfas. I think probably like you, I started reading about the myth and legend, the history, how we got to where we are, and just thought that this is just unbelievable. The whole ethos of the company is to produce cars that are wonderful to own and drive.
And it keeps coming up in these podcasts, but and it's awkward given the situation we find ourselves in. But the old French ad with the Alfa virus in a jar, I think just sums it up better than anything. It is once you're hooked.
Well, there's something about them which they repeated time and time again. I've owned several Alfas over the years. I mean, after the Sprint, I ended up with company cars and I couldn't have an Alfa. I tried my best to get a 164 off the fleet at one point, but the amount was, I don't know, they were expensive to get on a contract hire. And so in a fleet, a 164 would be way more expensive than a BMW 320 or something like that, sadly, at the time. But a salesman had one, got one somehow or other, and he left. And they had this 164 on the fleet, which nobody wanted, amazingly. Well, that's not true. I wanted it. But no, I couldn't have it. I did try it. Entry-level 164 twin spark, great car. Really, really lovely. But Beth and I we had two of those over the years. And the first one was superb. It was one of the original twin spark Lussos in pewter. So it was the same colour all the way from sill to roof. It had pewter rubbing panels or whatever you call them. But that's the same colour as the paint. And it looked fabulous. It went fabulous. I bought it with 98,000 miles on the clock, I think. And we sold it with 150 and bought one with half the mileage, which frankly wasn't as good, sadly. But the first 164 twin spark we had was just a wonderful car. Again, it would handle superbly. Not too much weight over the front wheels. If you go and drive a Cloverleaf or a 3 litre, you'll discover that there is a difference in the handling, just like a 156. The V6s are fabulous, but they don't handle as well as the twin sparks. But we loved that. 164s, sold them because they were becoming expensive to maintain. as in you'd end up with not just a 4-figure sum for servicing, but a 4-figure doubled. So, it just starts to become a bit of a crazy proposition as an everyday car.
But you've pretty much followed Alfa's development over the years in terms of the cars that you've had, haven't you? The 164 wasn't the last modern Alfa you had.
Oh no, I've had a 156 V6. Well, actually, before that, I had a 146 Ti. I think you, Guy, also had a 146 Ti.
I did.
I bought one of the first demonstrator cars. Actually, it wasn't a demonstrator. It was a showroom car from the original delivery batch. And actually, it was almost as reliable as my Alfas Sprint. More so if you count the rust situation, because it didn't have any. And that was just a great fun car. It's probably, with the exception of an Alfa, is the quickest in narrow country lanes that I've owned, because its turn-in was superb. Surprisingly, just a simple car, just engineered properly for driving, even though high seat position, which is slightly strange. I've tended to sit very low in all the Alfas I've owned, apart from that. But I love that car as well. A little bit rougher around the edges, but still great fun. And we replaced it with a 156. It got a V6 when they came out. So I ordered it at the launch date, got it on August the 1st, whatever it would be, 1998. I actually still own it, although it's not running. And I did 130,000 miles in it as an everyday car, funded by a company. So I did lots and lots of miles the first 3 years, like 20,000 miles a year for 3 years, driving around all sorts of customers up in Yorkshire. Actually, I was doing lots of work with alternative telcos based in West Yorkshire, which is where a lot of them were. So we were up and down the country almost every week, project managing stuff up there. So that car's been fabulous. Sadly, it's got a leaking steering rack, which isn't easy to get to or repair or cheap. But we're looking into ways in which we can get it back on the road soon, hopefully. And since then, I've had a couple of 159s. I think I had a 159 2.4 diesel Lisso, silver sport wagon, which is, again, a pretty reliable car. Very little went wrong on that. I think I had an oil cooler connection fail, and that's it. And that was under warranty. Nice car, lovely car. And then I had a guy turn up at the Thames Valley section meeting with a Q4 for sale, diesel Q4 sport wagon for sale. Bit of a paintwork problem on it. And I bought it because the Q4 is obviously the car I really wanted when I bought the other one. And it's just a different car. You've got a Q4 Spider. You know that the handling on them is just amazing. It's not just grip, it's handling as well. You can drift it. And on a track, I've had the tail sliding wide, which is rear-wheel drive, really. What are they, 70% rear-wheel bias in normal driving, I think? So it's just transforms the car into a completely different beast. It's a heavy car and it handles. I don't know what they have, 1.7, 1.8 tons or something stupid like that. And with a diesel lump up front or a V6 lump up front, it still goes incredibly well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not such an issue on the sport wagon, but the other advantage of the Q4 and the Spider is it eliminates a lot of the scuttle shake because the underpinnings tie the whole thing together better than the front wheel drive ones.
Yeah. It's a superb car, and I would buy a Giulia if it wasn't for the fact that there's no four-wheel drive and no sport wagon. The car I want, they basically decided they don't want to build. What, 3-year-old Giulietta about 7 years ago, with less than 6,000 miles on the clock. So basically a brand new car for half price, and that's the everyday car for Beth at the moment. She loves it. I'm not so keen. I don't like the steering feel, and I don't like. Well, the side effect of the steering feel is you don't really know which way the front wheels are pointing when you go hard off a roundabout or something like that. So it doesn't have the feel of the Giulia electric steering. The Giulia is an unbelievably nice car to drive. So, yeah, absolutely have that on my list of things to get at some point in the relatively near future. And I've missed out in all of that. Actually, we had a 33 as well at one point, a very rusty 33, but we'll ignore that one for now. That was just a second car for a while. But, about 31 years ago, I bought a Series 2 Spider, and I've still got it. No one's seen it in 10 years because it's been off the road being restored. However, it is finished. It's been completely restored from the point of view of the floor and sills, which had been badly repaired actually before I got it. So as a 15-year-old car, it had already had floor sections replaced, roughly. I finally, 10 years ago, got round to, getting our local specialist around the corner from me to rebuilt the floor, rebuilt the sills, a few mechanicals as well. We've done, rebuilt the carburetors, things like that. Bare metal respray in Semaforo, Rosso Semaforo. So Pininfarina red, a lot of people call it. The slightly orangey red colour, which is absolutely spot on for a 1975 model. What else have I done? Yeah, various other little bits of improvements and so on. But we put the replacement mohair hood back on it, stretched it in place eventually.
Again, John's fleet's evolved a little in the subsequent 5 years. First, the Spider finally made it back onto the road, and then he bit the bullet and bought that two-wheel drive Giulia Saloon, a 280 brake horsepower Veloce in Misano Blue. Finally, it's the turn of Section Supremo Jonathan Griffin. This one's actually from September 2020, but it's the longest of the four, so we've saved it for last.
Yes, I occasionally noticed an Alfa growing up, but it wasn't until my brother Gavin, my stepbrother Gavin, was 17 that things changed. His father was a great car enthusiast and had a lot of sports cars, and very indulgently bought his son a car for his 17th birthday. I'm sure it turned up on his 17th birthday, and it was a red Alfa Sud 1.3 Ti S-Reg. And, that was fantastic. The noise, the crackling exhaust note, and then the driving experience. Gavin is a very good driver, and although he was young, he passed his test very early and acquired this Sud and used to just race around the roads in it. It was a very exhilarating car. But it didn't last very long for various reasons. And I'd had my interest in Alfas peaked, but he replaced it with the most fantastic car, which was a 1967 or 8 Giulia Sprint GTV. So he had this car at the age of 17. He asked me if I would go down and have a look at it with him, and it was for sale in Hayling Island. So, we jumped in the car, drove down to Hayling Island and found the guy who was selling it. And it turned out to be a man called Ralph Lederman, who had raced an Alfetta GTV Turbo in the Alfa Romeo Owners Club Championship. So not only did we go down and see this lovely old Sprint GTV, but we were introduced to this guy who was totally immersed in the racing of old Alfas. And so we spent quite a long time talking to him. And Gavin couldn't resist the Sprint GTV, which was bluette with a lovely tan interior. So we drove back in convoy after the money had been handed over, and Ralph threw in some spares as well. So there were a couple of spare cylinder heads and all sorts of other bits and bobs which came with the car. And that was really, although I'd known about the 105 series cars, it was really the start of my sort of modest obsession with that series of cars, with the lovely designs, the fantastic cleanliness of the engine bay, the interesting handling, and just the fun of owning them. It was good, and it wasn't long before I acquired one myself.
We'll come back to your racing career later on, but it sounds as though Ralph had quite a lot to answer for, really.
Yes, he did. I mean, Ralph, as is so often with people who race cars, they're often quite modest actually about it all. They sort of take it in their stride, but you could see that it was a complete and utter obsession with him. He had a great big storage shed racked up with spares for various cars, and the way he spoke about the racing was designed to encourage young chaps to, yes, take more interest and hopefully join in. So
Gavin's now got his 105. How long was it before you followed suit?
He had that when he was 17. So that was in about, let me think, 76. That was in about 80. I suppose that was about 84. And then in 85, he bought a 1750 GTV in Chiswick. And later in 85, I bought one as well. So we both had 1750 GTV Mark IIs. And mine was quite a late one. It was an L-Reg, red 1750 GTV Mark II with a black interior. And I drove down to Boscombe near Bournemouth to view it. And of course, if you remember back in the day before the internet, if you wanted a car, you would be down to the newsagent to buy Auto Trader or Southern Auto Trader or the Free Ad paper or whatever it was at the time, or Loot, Exchange and Mart, and you'd be thumbing through all those small ads, running your fingers down the A's, looking for the Alfas, and of course there were all sorts of quite exotic ones for sale back in the 80s. And so a 1750 GTV advertised for, I think it was about 675 quid. I thought, yes, sounds good. I rang the guy And although he had an English name, he spoke with an Italian accent. So I thought, maybe this car was going to be good. I drove down to Boscombe and looked at it, and it was great. It was sat there alongside a couple of other 105 series cars, and he took me out for a drive in it, and it sounded good, seemed to go well, and the deal was done. I think I ended up paying £600 for it and drove it back. And of course, as is always the way with old cars, the heart rules the head sometimes, doesn't it? And on a test drive, it's not always immediately apparent that there are things that aren't quite as they should be. So the first thing I noticed on the way home was that the handbrake didn't really hold. Put it up 3 notches, nothing's happening. Put it up another couple, there's just a slight amount of grip, but nothing much. And then there was a vibration from the prop shaft. But I sorted some of those things out and had a lot of fun in it. But I'd always wondered why the boot was painted with thick black paint inside. And one day I was looking inside, I could see an edge. So I got a screwdriver and I sort of picked away at this edge, and I levered it, and it pinged up, and I grabbed hold of it and pulled up a strip that had been plastered down on the boot floor. When I turned it over, it said Smedley's Garden Peas, and someone had gone to a great deal of trouble. Instead of welding a small patch on some holes in the boot floor, which would have taken not a lot of time, they'd intricately cut the Smedley's pea tin to the shape that was required, and then resined it down and then painted over it, sort of fillering the edges so it didn't look very obvious. So that was another lesson in using a magnet and tapping things and looking carefully when you buy an old car. But yes, that was my first Alfa, a 1750 GT V Mark II, and I had it as my everyday car for a time. Used to drive to work in it. I remember going down to Castle Combe to watch the Alfa Romeo Owners Club Championship there in it with a couple of friends, and it was a fantastic introduction to running an Alfa. And
the first of how many 105s that you've had now, excluding race cars?
Quite a few. I haven't totted them up for you in advance, but I had, I think I got the GTV through one MOT before it got, it donated its best bits to some other cars, shall we say. I had a 1750 Berliner in about 1987-88, which was a very interesting car. It performed well. It had lots of space, it was comfortable, and I really liked it. But because, when you own a car, you often notice other cars of the same model. And I joined the Alfa Club, I think it was late 85, and I thought it would be marvellous to go along to one of the club test days. So they would run test days at places like North Weald Aerodrome. You could turn up and go around the cones, and you got timed, so it was all a bit of fun. And, one of the guys doing that was also in a Berliner, and his name was Chris Taylor. And Chris drove his Berliner on the road, but he put a cage in it, or he had a cage in it, and he also raced it at the weekend. And I thought this was absolutely marvellous. And I thought, I will have a plan to do the same thing. I just had this idea of following Chris out onto the track and as sort of dicing through Paddock Hill Bend at Brands or whatever. The Berliner wasn't the best auto test machine. The solid axle and the handbrake on the back in a long, heavy car didn't make it as agile as some of the others, but it was still good fun. But yeah, that was the only Berliner I've ever had. I took it to a guy with the idea of getting it race prepared, and he put it up in the air, and he looked at it all over, and he got his little hammer out and started tapping the sills, and I could see he was sucking his teeth. And he said to me, well, do you know what? He said, if you were going to race this, he said, I'd replace the sills. If I was racing this, I think that's what you should do. So, of course, I asked him how much it would be. And then I sucked my teeth when he told me. I was a bit crestfallen. I wasn't sure what to do. But he said, well, as it happens, I've got a Julia Super rolling shell over there, which just needs an engine and gearbox. And that could come your way if you were interested. I know that's slightly diverting away from the ownership question, and maybe we should come to that later. But that was how I acquired my Julia Super.
Presumably for less than the cost of replacing 2 sills.
For not much more, actually. For not much more. Because at the time, the Alfa panels, if you were going to use genuine Alfa panels, they were quite hard to come by. And we're talking, 30 years ago. And there were really no repro panels of quality. They were just bent bits of metal that people had to do a lot of fettling to get to fit. So, and he knew that. He knew that it would be quite a lot of work to do the job properly. So I thought about it for not that long. And in the end, I actually donated the Berliner to Chris Taylor as a spare. So he had a whole load of spare doors and panels and things. And I bought the Julia Super and subsequently had it turned into a race car, which was great.
As I said, let's come back to the racing. So What came after the...
After the Berliner? Well, the Berlin. What actually happened was that I had a number of Alfas. So after the 1750 GTV, I had a 1.2 Ti Sud. Which I love. I bought. I think I was the second owner from new, and the original owner was a dentist in Reading, about a mile from where I lived. And I picked it up. I think he'd had about 95% of the use of the car, and I got the remaining 5% because you could buy Alfa Suds very cheaply back in the mid late 80s. I think I paid about £195 for it with an MOT, quite a long MOT, but coming towards the end of that MOT period and having run it through the winter, I could see that there was maybe a little bit more fresh air around the bottoms of the front wings than really there should be. And it did go to the scrapyard. Sadly, I mean, nowadays, of course, you'd pull your hair out having to scrap a Sud that could be rescued with a bit of welding. But then it was just another old car. And, of course, as the numbers reduce, they become much more cherished by, the remaining ones become much more cherished. So I had the 1.2 Ti, and I followed that with a blue 1.3 Ti, the 1286cc version, which was a lovely zippy engine. Not many more brake horsepower on paper, but it felt as though it had much more go. It was much more of a sort of racing machine, in inverted commas. And I went on holiday with friends to Yorkshire with that and filled it up with rucksacks. We went hiking. It did some good work. And again, it was another one that was a young man's car. You buy it cheap and you know that it's not going to last you more than a year or two at the most. So when that came up for MOT renewal and looked like it was going to need a load of work, I sold it to someone I knew by the name of Jamie Porter of the Alfa workshop. I mean, this is years ago. This is back in the 80s. And Jamie at the time was working on cars, hadn't set up the Alfa workshop, but it was no surprise when he finally did. And that car, he turned into a bimotore and put 2 engine, and apparently it went very well. But what became of it after that, I've no idea. The last Sud I had was probably the lowest mileage Alfa I've had, which was a 20,000 mile Alfa Sud TI Green Cloverleaf, a silver one, which was Y-Reg and went by the nickname of Wobbly because first 3 letters of its number plate were WBL, and it was a Y-Reg. And that was a great car. I had that for about 5 years, something like that, 4 years. Did quite a few miles in it. And that really, it wasn't as fast as some of its contemporaries in a straight line, like a Golf GTI or even an XR 2i or 3i, but boy, was it fast around the corners. And Alfa Suds are legendary in the handling stakes for a very good reason, because the design of them is just fantastic for road holding. And there's many the smile that came onto my face just by braking not at all through a series of roundabouts and making rapid progress down the road, commuting to work back in the late 80s. It was just such a great car to drive, such good fun and very fond memories. So yeah, that was the last Sud I had, and I suppose that I'd got rid of the Berliner by then. In 1990, so whilst I had the silver Sud, I bought a Dutch blue 1973 Julia Super 1600 from a club member called John Norbury, who lived in Hertford. He and his wife both ran Alfas. His actually was a blue 1600 GT Junior, and the Super was his wife Enid's car. So when they decided they were going to sell one, I bought that, and I had some work done to it. There were a few things that needed tidying up, and that has been with me ever since, and I still have it over 30 years on. So it's been a second car most of the time, or tucked up in the garage as a high days, holidays and Alfa Club show car. But from time to time, when my main car went wrong or we had sold and we were looking for another one, it was pressed into service. When our son Gabriel was born, my wife Fran used to drive him around in it to toddler groups or to nursery school for a while. And so that has got we've got quite an affection for that car in the family. And that's why it's still here when so many of the others have come and gone.
And there's a couple of others that you've had for a while, aren't there?
Yes, I suppose it depends what you mean by had for a while.
Well, I think until the 5-year Alfa Sud ownership, we were averaging about a year a car. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. They were a year to 2 years per car. Some of them overlapped a bit.
Yeah.
Trying to think what the next one was. I dallied with a number of cars in the early 90s. I bought a couple of Alfa 75s. So I had a couple of Alfa 75 1.8s, which I used as road cars. And I really liked those, actually. Nice revvy engine and great handling. And I had a left-hand drive 1.6, a French car, which was great as well, which a friend asked me if I'd sell it to him, and I said yes, of course. I had a 75 Twin Spark, which I bought needing a couple of jobs done, including a rear wheel bearing, I remember, and sold that for a profit. And I bought and sold several of these cars just casually. I bought them as my road car, did some work and sold them, made a little bit of money to pay for racing that I'd started in the 90s. I had a couple of 3-litre 75s, which were absolutely awesome. Anyone who's had a Busso V6 engine car knows exactly what I'm talking about. Off a roundabout, booting a 75, it would adopt a fantastic angle up the road. You'd be turning into it as you went straight along the road, but at an angle. And of course, just the sound of the motor was fantastic. So I'm just trying to think what else I had. In fact, the newest Alfa I have had was a 145 green cloverleaf, which was about a 97 car. And to give you an idea of when that was, I had that before my son Gabriel was born, and he's nearly 19. So it was relatively new at the time. And again, I bought it in East London with it was missing one of its gears. It was making some funny noises, but it was very cheap. It clearly needed some attention, but I took it to A.D. Hawkins at AH Motorsports, and he's a very competent chap. He looked over it, fixed it all, gave me the bill, and I ended up with a really nice 145 cloverleaf for not too much cash. And I thought, fantastic, here we go. We've got a car that'll be absolutely fine for Fran to run around taking the new arrival around. But of course, what you don't realise is that with cars like that, you've got to lift babies into the back seat. You've got to slide the seat forward, lean over, and lift this hefty baby in the car seat into the back. And I'd say probably within about 2 or 3 weeks of having Gabriel, Fran's back had gone from trying to lift him into the back. So I had to take over the lifting, and then I started getting a bad back from lifting him into the car. And we had to get rid of the car. We swapped it for a 5-door Fiat at the time, moving away from Alfa, which was sad. But again, a good friend of mine said, "Oh, can I buy it?" And it disappeared very quickly. I didn't even need to advertise it. So that was the most recent Alfa I've had, the newest one. But of course, I've had Alfas the whole of the intervening time, the blue Super that I mentioned. And you said I have some others. I do. I have an old original right-hand drive UK delivered Giulia 1600 Ti, which is a lovely moss green colour. And there was a little bit of a story about finding that and actually managing to acquire it. So Fran's family live in Scotland, and we were visiting them, and I saw on Auto Trader, because I just couldn't resist flicking through Auto Trader while I was up there, I saw actually really for 2004 a relatively rare ad for a 105 series car in Auto Trader, and it said, Giulia Saloon and 1964. I thought 1964, well, there really are no early Giulia saloons in this country. There are a handful of original right-hand drives that are actually going. And I persuaded my in-laws that it would be great to drive from between Glasgow and Edinburgh all the way down to the Ayrshire coast for a lovely day out at the seaside, so I could slip off and have a look at this Giulia Ti, which I did. And I didn't pull the wool over their eyes. They knew what I was up to. But while they went off and enjoyed the views on the coastline, I met up with a guy who ran a garage in Girvan on the Ayrshire coast. Very nice man. And he said, yes, I also have a farm up in the hills, and the car is currently in the barn up there. So we jumped in his car, and we went up through about 6 or 7 gates that he had to get out and open and then shut behind him, up to the farmhouse, which was an old stone place with a huge stone barn with 3 arches in the front. And I could feel the excitement of waiting. The hairs went up on the back of my neck. I knew that this old car was going to be in the barn. And we walked up to the door on the far left and in. And it was a little bit dark in there, but some light was spilling through on the far end. And I could see a shape under sheets. And it was unmistakable. That 3-box Giulia Saloon shape. And we went up, he pulled the sheets off. And it was amazing. There was a car there that was really so original. It was amazing. It looked as though it had its original paint. I mean, to be fair, the tyres looked like they were probably from the 1960s. And it was just...
Which is less desirable than original paint.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, there was another story there. I mean, the tyres were quite wooden. But to cut a long story short, I looked round it and I just knew that I had to buy it. You know, these opportunities don't come up very often, especially when it's something that you really appreciate and would like to have. So I thought, well, I'd try negotiating with him. But he said, young man, he said, I know you've come from London. And, I knew that meant really that there was no way I was going to negotiate. So I said, okay, I will buy it. And so I paid him the money he was asking. And that was the first time in my life, and probably just about the only time I've ever seen £100 notes, because he wanted cash, obviously. And I had to go to the bank in Glasgow and get the money in cash, and it came in hundreds. So I had 60 £100 notes, paid £6,000 for the car. And, it was a lot of money at the time. And I thought, am I doing the right thing? Because you never know. The values of those cars at that time were not as high as they are now. And I thought, well, maybe I'm paying over the odds. But I still thought it's so original. And I know that I can conserve it and look after it. And it will be a nice thing to be able to bring out into the open. And so that's what I did. And he did say that he'd bought it from the original owner and he'd seen it in a garage in Ayrshire in the 60s when he was a young mechanic there. So he'd known the car from when it was new. And when it came up for sale, I think probably when it was around 10 years old, something like that, or maybe a little bit more, he bought it for his wife. But of course, it turned out she didn't really like it that much. And so it sat in the showroom of his garage for many years, apparently, and hadn't been more than 10 miles from Girvan for probably, 25 years, something like that, when I bought it. And the collecting of it was interesting. I thought, well, I've got no tools with me. I've got no backup except Fran and Gabriel. So I need to be prepared. I went to Halfords. I bought oil. I bought a fuel can. I bought a zippy case of tools, a tow rope, some jump leads, some WD-40, and probably some other things I can't remember. Brake fluid, I think I bought. Got as many things as I reasonably could. And on our way back from seeing the in-laws, we diverted via Ayrshire to the garage where the car was, ready and waiting. And off I drove, waved goodbye to the nice garage man, and off I went. This was October 2004, so it wasn't cold, but it was cool. We left Ayrshire and drove down to the M74 and onwards, and that takes you down towards the border with England. And I realised once the car was at speed that there was no heat coming out of the heater. And the temperature dropped a little bit as the day went on. And actually, you know why people in vintage cars have got thick blankets wrapped around their legs, because it is really cold in cars with all that wind chill on them, and it does transfer through to the inside. But anyway, the car was humming along perfectly at about 50 to 55 miles an hour. I had fuel, the oil pressure was holding up, temperature was good, and I thought, yes, we're going to do it. We cruised down past Gretna Green into England and carried on. And then it started getting darker, and I turned the side lights on. And when I did so, the battery light on the dash just glowed faintly. And I thought, the dynamo is obviously marginal on charging the battery. A bit later, it was darker still, and I flipped it onto dip beam, and then the light was coming through even more brightly. And I thought, oh no, I hope the battery's charged up well, because this isn't looking good. And then it got fully dark, and I was thinking things couldn't get any worse for the battery, and then it started raining. And so I was flipping the wipers on, and every time I put the wipers on, suddenly the light on the dash became incredibly bright. And I knew things were getting very bad when all the dash lights started flickering, and we were down between Manchester and Birmingham somewhere, and I could see I saw a sign for services, and I knew that I just had to pull in at the next services. So pulled in, parked up and turned it off, and I turned the key. I knew what was going to happen. Nothing. So called the AA, and the AA man came after about an hour, and he said, oh, we'll have you going again. And we popped the bonnet, and he got his big starter pack out, put the huge clamps fishing around in the engine bay, but I don't know exactly what he did, but he shorted the voltage regulator and there was a massive blue flame and a smell of burning. And then he said, I think I'm going to have to call for recovery. And we certainly weren't driving anywhere else that day. But that was the end of the story, essentially. Got it towed home and tucked away in the garage. And subsequently, that car was brought back to life with the help of a very good guy in Suffolk, Titus Rowlandson at Victory Garage, who's a great guy to use if you want to conserve a car. And so he stripped and cleaned everything, and we only replaced the bits that really needed replacing. So yes, of course, it had a new set of historic Pirelli Cinceratos, and it had some rubber bits like brake hoses for safety and some of the other hoses. But nearly everything on it is as it was when I picked it up. And the only paint it's ever had in its life is a little bit along the sills, which the previous owner said was done in the late 70s. So it's a lovely original car with about 37,000 miles on the clock, which currently is tucked up under sheets in my garage, waiting for the next outing, next year, hopefully.
And it's not on its own in the garage, is it?
No, it's not. In that, it sits, I've got a little workshop, so it sits at the back of the workshop. And the reason I can't take it out at the moment is that there's a car in front of it. And that is a left-hand drive Giulia saloon, a Giulia 1600 Super from 1972. And that was a historic rally car. I saw it for sale on eBay in 2012. And I looked at it and I watched it in my eBay list. And I thought, look at that. It hasn't bid up very high. I'm sure it's going to go quite a lot higher. So I picked a number which I thought, I'd be happy to buy it for that. And I'm sure someone's going to pay a lot more. And with about 10 seconds to go, I placed the bid. I hadn't seen the car, didn't know anything about it. I hadn't mentioned it to Fran. And of course, you get that little sort of thing on the screen that's sort of going round and round while eBay is processing your bid. And then it popped up and said, congratulations, you're the winner. So I bought myself, sight unseen, a rally-prepared Giulia Super, left-hand drive one. And how exciting that was. I called Titus and said, Titus, I bought a car. Could you pick it up and take it back to your place and just give it the once over? Because I need to know the things that are good about it and the things that need doing to it. So he did. He picked it up, took it back, had a look, and it turned out that it was very good indeed. It had lots of good bits on it, and a limited slip axle, a special one, a rebuilt gearbox, 45 Webers, and a special Alfaholic suspension, which hadn't been mentioned in the ad, and all sorts of other bits, as well as a cage as well. So it hadn't looked quite as nice as one would like in the ad because it had been rallied with utility in mind. So it had Subaru Impreza seats in it. So I quickly swapped those out for some Ridgard leather rally seats, which are fantastic looking and suit the period of the car. And Titus was talking to me about the engine. He said, this is a monster of an engine. It turned out that the engine had been built by Dave Hood for a guy who was racing a GT-AM and had gone so fast up a mountain in France somewhere that he'd gone straight off the edge and wrecked the car. And the engine was about the only salvageable bit, and even then I believe it needed some work. But Dave acquired it to put in a racing GTA in the UK, but I believe that never really happened, and so it was sold to the guy who had been building this Giulia Super Rally car, and I inherited it with all sorts of interesting modifications, including very large inlet ports with slide-in reducers, which I think were some sort of Auto Delta mod for racing at some point. So I'm sure someone out there knows more about them than I do. So yeah, we got that car back together, but we didn't put the monster engine in it. We used my Group N-Spec engine from the Alfa Championship of the 90s, which I still had, and with a few modifications, so different pistons and a ported head. And that's the engine in the car at the moment. And it goes exceptionally well, about 165 brake horsepower, handles very flat, makes a very good noise. And I've used that as my show attendance car for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's always an occasion to take that car out on the road. It's a little bit too bumpy, it's a little bit too noisy, but it's always good fun.
Is that the complete collection at the moment?
It nearly is, because I still have the race car that I've had for 30 years. And I do have another GT Junior tucked up against a rainy day in a hidden location, which may come out at some time. But that would need a lot more work than I'm prepared to do right at this moment. I
enjoyed that trip down memory lane. We'll be back in 4 weeks' time on February the 1st with an all-new edition. Episode 118 will be available to download from 1:30 p.m. from the club's website, Podcast Addict, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else good podcasts are found. Until then, stay safe.